This is the end of the line for your loan. I need the $100,000 you owe us paid back in full by the end of this week. We have always prided ourselves on providing exceptional meals to every customer, with no exception, striving daily to live up to this paramount theme. Yet, all day long, we were bombarded with complaints, inquiries, and harassing phone calls. Papers accusing us of being a scam and demanding money back are plastered around the store. Stones are thrown in from the outside, and some even hurl heartless insults. This means we can't lend any more money to a poor restaurant. Pay back the money, you deficit-riddled trash of a restaurant. Mr. Lewis, the bank's loan officer, said this and laughed loudly. He's the worst kind of man. An elitist, incompetent man who understands nothing. I will protect the store, our customers, and our employees no matter what. I decided to send the foolish Mr. Lewis straight to hell. To an endless hell from which he can never climb out of. I am Sophia, running a fine dining restaurant at the age of 71. I married Joseph, for years my senior, when I was 30, and we were blessed with a daughter, Grace. 40 years have passed since then, and Grace is now married and has left home, and Joseph is no longer with us. This fine dining restaurant, passed down through Joseph's family for generations, has mostly been left to me, as most of his relatives have passed away due to old age, and there are no younger generations to take over. Running a restaurant is harder than one might think, and every day is unbelievably busy. But still, supported by loyal customers who have been with us for years and suppliers who provide us with fresh ingredients, I find fulfillment and motivation to keep going. This restaurant is filled with my dreams. And the employees working here are like family to me. I am firmly determined to protect the livelihoods of these employees, no matter what happens. It was about 3 years ago that I took over this restaurant from Joseph, right around the time Grace got married. At that time, a pandemic was spreading worldwide, causing the restaurant's finances to be in the red. During these tough times, I was able to keep the business going thanks to Mr. Walker, a banker who believed in me and continued to provide loans. Mr. Walker's bank has been taking care of Joseph's family for generations. When I took over, Mr. Walker was assigned to handle our account. Mr. Walker, 45 and single, is a man with a gentle demeanor and a flexible mindset. He was willing to accommodate our future business strategies, allowing us to continue receiving loans. Thanks to him, we've been able to keep paying our employees without delay and remain open to this day. Now, Mr. Walker is being transferred to an overseas branch. Mr. Walker, when will you be leaving for the overseas branch? Mr. Walker cares about our restaurant and often visits. Today, I took the opportunity to ask him about his departure date. In about a month. Don't worry, I'll make sure everything that your restaurant is properly handed over. Mr. Walker modestly claims his promotion is due to his bachelor status, but I know well his competence from the various consultations we've had about loans. This promotion is truly a significant achievement, and I am genuinely happy for him. My main concern now is who will take over from Mr. Walker. And that's when Mr. Lewis was introduced as his successor. Mr. Lewis, 29, holds the position of section chief at such a young age. He is handsome, and his demeanor conveys a sense of competency. William, please take good care of Sophia for me. As Mr. Walker said this. Pleasure to meet you, I'm William Lewis. I'll take good care of you and the restaurant. Mr. Lewis responded with a fresh smile. Relieved by Mr. Lewis's smile, I was able to send off Mr. Walker to his overseas assignment without any reservations. Some time after Mr. Walker had gone abroad, Mr. Lewis visited my restaurant. While he had visited a few times with Mr. Walker for the handover, this was his first visit alone. I offered Mr. Lewis coffee, just as I had done for Mr. Walker, and stepped away for a moment to prepare. That's when I heard Mr. Lewis mutter something under his breath and click his tongue. So outdated. Could I have misheard? When I glanced at Mr. Lewis, noticing that I was looking, he showed me a fresh smile. I decided it must have been my misunderstanding. Maybe I should have realized then what kind of person Mr. Lewis really was. He said he just came to see how things were and left. Though I couldn't make much time due to the busy shop, he seemed fine and smiled throughout our meeting. However, I could hear him sigh deeply whenever I left the table. I didn't know what those sighs were about, but it was slightly concerning. Having never experienced this with Mr. Walker, I felt a bit uneasy. 2 days later, Mr. Lewis appeared in the shop again. Thinking he was visiting frequently because he was new to the account, I served him coffee as usual. Then, with his usual smile, he said something like this. I'm not fond of coffee when I can't identify the brand. And this cup, who knows who's used it before? If you want to serve me coffee, please prepare it in a brand and a special cup that I specify. This is just gross. I was momentarily stunned, not understanding what I was being told, frozen while looking at Mr. Lewis. Unconcerned with how I felt, Mr. Lewis continued. I don't know what you discussed with Mr. Walker to get your loans, but I have my own way of doing things since I'm an elite. Please consider that I might not be able to extend any further loans. While touching his laptop and not bothering to look at me, he spoke down to me with a smile on his face. I had thorough discussions with Mr. Walker and prepared a meticulous business plan. Have you had a chance to look at it? I managed a feeble counterargument. Mr. Lewis's expression visibly changed as he sighed and said, Look, that was with Mr. Walker, right? I've told you, I have my way of doing things. Business plan? Is there a need to look at it? Whatever plan you have, if it's all losses, what's the point? His demeanor and tone had completely changed from his usually fresh smile, as if he was a different person. Taken aback and unable to respond. It seems like there's hardly any money in your account. How do you plan to repay? He said with a sleazy grin. Even after I explained that I had never missed a repayment. Well, who knows when you might fail to repay? This building is old, too. You can't afford to rebuild it, can you? I don't want to lend money to such a place. With that, Mr. Lewis left the shop. Was that really the same Mr. Lewis who had been generously sharing his fresh smiles? Was this his true nature? For a while, I was stunned and couldn't move. After Mr. Lewis's devilish visit, I steeled myself and stood firm in my restaurant. I couldn't let Mr. Lewis's words sway me too much. I had a duty to protect the employees of this restaurant. Sensing my resolve, the staff went above and beyond, resulting in excellent sales for the shop. I was filled with determination not to let Mr. Lewis have the last word. When the shop's sales began to stabilize, one of the newly arrived employees rushed over to me in a panic. Sophia, you need to see this. He handed me his mobile phone. I put on my glasses and peered at the screen, unable to hide my shock at the content. This restaurant was awful. The fish and vegetables weren't fresh. I want my money back. The staff were the worst, especially an older woman. What do they think customers are? A fine dining restaurant? More like a scam. Though the post didn't mention our restaurant by name, a photo of its exterior was attached. This is a post on social media, and it seems to be spreading. I just found out about it this morning, and it's awful, he said, his voice quivering slightly. It was infuriating. This restaurant, from the ingredients to every aspect of our service, is run with great care. We aim to provide the best dining experience for every visitor, without exception. Every day, both I and the staff work tirelessly to ensure that our guests leave feeling happy, satisfied, and that they've had the best experience possible. There's no way such a post could be justified. And I can't imagine any of our guests making such a post. Other employees also reported that the restaurant was becoming a topic of discussion on social media. All day long, we were besieged by complaints, inquiries, and harassing calls. Papers accusing us of fraud and demanding money were plastered around the shop, and some threw stones and hurled cruel words. 3 days after the social media post, we were in a situation where we couldn't operate at all. I knew from various news stories that social media could be a tool for inflicting pain on people. But experiencing the attacks firsthand, I truly understood the horror of social media. As I was trying to make sense of why this was happening, one of the employees came to me with a suggestion. I was surprised to hear what he proposed.
It might be possible. If it's him.
I immediately contacted someone. The person on the other end readily agreed to my proposal. If there are people who use social media to attack, there are also those who know how to defend against such attacks. Feeling down wasn't going to help. I had to protect this shop. I decided to temporarily close the shop until this turmoil subsided. To protect our regular customers and employees. Of course, I intended to ensure the employees' wages during this time. Then, Mr. Lewis called.
Oh?
Decided to close the shop? It's pretty bad right now, huh?
The fraudulent fine dining restaurant, right?
Terrible.
But it's just karma coming back to you. Maybe it's best if you just close the shop for good.
Could these really be the words of an elite banker who graduated from a prestigious university? He must have risen through the ranks by neglecting struggling businesses and catering only to profitable clients. I only had one thing to say to Mr. Lewis.
I will absolutely protect this restaurant, our customers, and our employees.
Mr. Lewis replied.
Instead of just saying nice words, pay back the money you owe.
And hung up the phone. I swore to myself that I would protect everything no matter what. Eventually, the restaurant had to close for about 2 weeks. The damage during that time was not insignificant, but with the support of our employees, partners, and loyal customers who rallied behind us, we managed to reopen. Upon hearing of our reopening, Mr. Lewis came to the restaurant, wearing a sleazy smile.
Is this your last day of business?
Well, good luck. He looked around the restaurant and continued to make rude comments as usual.
Mr. Lewis, what brings you here at this time of the day?
I asked, and Mr. Lewis sneered.
I'm hosting a very important client today. For some reason, they chose this place, so I had no choice. It was convenient since I had something to discuss with you too.
Then, he took a seat at the best table without waiting to be invited.
Make sure you serve well today. I have a very important guest coming.
Mr. Lewis was intimidating even to the staff.
So, Mr. Lewis, what is your business today? I thought the repayment date was still a while away.
I inquired.
About that, I've decided to cut off your loan. I need the $100,000 you owe us paid back in full by the end of this week.
Mr. Lewis said.
Is the branch manager or Mr. Walker aware of this?
When I said that, Mr. Lewis replied.
I've said this multiple times, but this is my job. Mr. Walker has nothing to do with it. Just understand that we can't lend any more money to a poor restaurant. Pay back the money, you deficit-riddled trash of a restaurant.
And laughed loudly.
Pay back the $100,000? Sure, but you'll regret it.
I said, and for a moment, Mr. Lewis's face turned serious. But soon, he said, I won't. And laughed again. Such a despicable man. an elitist, incompetent man who understands nothing. I decided to send the foolish Mr. Lewis straight to hell. To an endless hell from which he can never climb out of.
So, with the next repayment, our business dealings with your bank will be concluded, right?
Yes.
Just make sure you pay it back. I don't want to have anything to do with such a restaurant anymore,
Mr. Lewis said, sitting pompously. I'd like him to disappear because he's an eyesore, but I can't bother the guests who are said to be coming.
When will your guest be arriving, Mr. Lewis?
I asked, prompting Mr. Lewis to start bragging confidently.
You wouldn't meet someone like my guest in your entire life if you were as poor as you are. He's the president of the most talked about IT company right now, so he's busy. He'll contact me when he's arriving. I'm just waiting until then.
I figured he hadn't secured a definite appointment, but kept quiet as his smugness was only temporary. Probably, a lucrative deposit transaction with that IT company was in sight for him. Mr. Lewis was waiting for his guest, constantly checking his mobile phone. Such an empty shop. After all that publicity, no one would come to a place like this. I swallowed my retort to Mr. Lewis's comment and ignored him. Then, welcome. A lively greeting from an employee echoed through the restaurant.
Some odd customers do come to such places, huh?
Ignoring Mr. Lewis completely, I went to welcome the customers. At the entrance were Carter, the fish wholesaler we've been dealing with for years, and Dylan, a farmer owner. Sophia, we were worried after seeing the posts on social media.
We were irritated to see even our proud produce being bad-mouthed.
The two young men brought with them an abundance of fresh fish and just-picked vegetables in their hands. Their beautiful ingredients received a joyful welcome from the staff.
Don't worry, Sophia. We'll blow away those sneaky rumors.
Saying so, he took photos of me with the fresh fish with his mobile phone. Dylan did the same with the vegetables. In fact, both were well-known producers and influencers who broadcast about fish wholesaling and farming on social media.
We're proudly providing these ingredients here, and we'll make sure to broadcast that, so no more nonsense stories will come up.
Mr. Lewis looked uncomfortable at these words. Just then, someone approached Mr. Lewis.
What's wrong, Mr. Lewis? You look upset.
Mr. Lewis was surprised to see Mr. Walker. It was as if he couldn't believe Mr. Walker was there.
Mr. Walker, you've come all the way here.
Carter and Dylan were led to their seats by the staff, and I rushed over to Mr. Walker. With a warm smile, Mr. Walker said,
Hello, Sophia. It's only natural for me to come when I heard you were in trouble. Besides, the branch manager asked me to come. To stop William's rampage.
He glanced sharply at Mr. Lewis.
William, I hear you've been saying you're going to cut off the loan.
Mr. Lewis appeared slightly shaken under Mr. Walker's gaze, but quickly started to argue.
Mr. Walker, you've done wrong too. Handing over such a continuously loss-making restaurant to me. With the recent social media issue, this restaurant is finished, right? I've decided to terminate the loan, judging it as beyond recovery.
Hearing Mr. Lewis's words, Mr. Walker shook his head in disbelief.
You don't understand anything. It's not Sophia who will suffer from the loan being cut off. It's the bank.
Mr. Lewis looked at Mr. Walker with a surprised expression. Mr. Walker continued speaking.
Didn't you see earlier? This restaurant has long been in good standing with well-known and reputable suppliers. Not only that, but it's also partnered with some of the country's leading entertainment agencies and sports organizations, ensuring future profitability. It's all thanks to my husband's connections, yes. Everyone has been so kind to us, and we're grateful for that. we're also planning major events with our partner companies. Didn't you read that in the business plan? Oh, right. You mentioned it wasn't necessary to look into it,
I said to Mr. Lewis with a hint of sarcasm. Yet, Mr. Lewis countered me.
Partnerships, you say, but those are just your husband's connections, right? And he's not around anymore. In the long run, who knows how long those will last? Besides, with all this commotion, there's no way you can hold an event.
Is Mr. Lewis truly an elite? Mr. Walker and I exchanged incredulous looks.
William, you seem to be under some misapprehension. Sophia's husband is still alive. He's currently abroad on business. I've been under his care overseas, too. As for the commotion, it seems the producers have already taken care of that. Moreover, the malicious social media posts appear to have been deliberately written with ill intent, so explaining the situation should clear things up with the other party.
Mr. Lewis still looked unsatisfied.
Deposits. You don't have much in your bank or anyone else's. How do you plan to pay your employees and expenses without our loan?
I didn't want to reveal everything to this man, but it couldn't be helped now. I've always preferred not to hold cash. Most of my assets are in land, apartments, and gold. So, if we can no longer receive loans, I'll just convert a little gold into cash. Mr. Walker hit Mr. Lewis with the harsh reality. In other words, by your arrogant mistake, you've squandered the significant benefits Sophia could have brought to the bank. Mr. Lewis turned pale upon hearing this. Sophia, I'm sorry for making you go through this unpleasantness. The branch manager who appointed William as my successor is deeply regretting it. He had high hopes for William and is disappointed. He plans to come and apologize in person. Mr. Walker bowed deeply to me. Neither Mr. Walker nor the branch manager were at fault. In that sense, I too was to blame for being fooled by Mr. Lewis's initially charming demeanor. But that's a different story. Mr. Lewis, who had hurt my shop, my employees, and everyone involved, needed to face further consequences.
Mr. Lewis, you've been talking about the restaurant causing a fuss, but you're the one who initiated it, aren't you?
I confronted Mr. Lewis. He turned away, pretending not to know. Even if Mr. Lewis wouldn't confess, we had solid evidence.
Andrew, would you come here, please?
I called over a man. He was Andrew, my daughter Grace's husband. Andrew began speaking in front of Mr. Lewis.
We investigated the critical posts about this restaurant. While the details are confidential, we identified the IP address and found it originated from Mr. Lewis's mobile phone.
Mr. Lewis's face contorted.
Normally, people post from more difficult-to-trace devices. It's bold of you to post from your own mobile phone.
Andrew, too, spoke to Mr. Lewis with sarcasm.
So what? Posting something doesn't make it a crime. There's something called freedom of expression. Don't get so smug over something like this.
An utterly ignorant man. When someone posts content on social media that lowers a store's social standing, it can be subject to defamation laws. It might also infringe on laws against insult or business interference. Well, I'll consult with a lawyer about this part later.
I never thought it would be possible to identify the culprit on social media. An employee suggested we could, thinking Andrew might be able to do it. Truly, it's no surprise he's the president of the most talked about IT company right now.
My words seemed to have struck Mr. Lewis the most.
The president of an IT company?
Speaking of which, Andrew, you mentioned you had a meeting here today, didn't you?
Has your guest arrived yet?
I know I was being a bit spiteful. But this level of spite is gentle compared to the malice we faced. Ah, it seems they have arrived, but there's no need for further discussion. Nice to meet you, Mr. Lewis. I'm Andrew, the one you were scheduled to meet today. Regarding our company's deposit, I'll be voiding that agreement. Mr. Lewis's face twisted significantly. Then Andrew continued. It seems Sophia has been greatly helped by you. At this, Mr. Lewis collapsed to his knees on the spot. In the end, the branch manager contacted by Mr. Walker took Mr. Lewis away. The branch manager deeply bowed, saying he would visit again later. After that, to celebrate the restaurant's reopening, longtime regulars and customers who supported our shop gathered, making it the liveliest the restaurant has ever been. I heard about Mr. Lewis's fate from Mr. Walker, who had returned overseas. Due to the damages caused by canceling my loan and the deposit agreement with Andrew that was about to be concluded by the branch manager, Mr. Lewis faced a significant claim for damages. I've always been grateful to the bank and would have liked to continue transactions if not for Mr. Lewis. However, as a last act of defiance, Mr. Lewis managed to linger at the bank for a while. He was promoted to section chief early and was eager to become a department head soon. As you can guess, he made himself look good in front of major clients and excluded the others to boost his performance. His luck ran out when he targeted your shop. Mr. Lewis tried to discredit my shop to decrease its reputation and sales by posting malicious reviews on social media. Such a selfish and malicious way of thinking. Before long, Mr. Lewis was reassigned to a regional bank. Soon, he'll be receiving a love letter from me, detailing the charges of defamation and business interference. The sin of hurting others for personal gain is heavy. He should suffer and live with guilt for the rest of his life. On the other hand, I'm about to turn 72. Despite everything, my regular customers continue to visit, and our relationships with partner suppliers remain strong. All the employees still show up for work without anyone missing. Preparations for the event outlined in our business plan are steadily progressing. However, it's inevitable that my body isn't as cooperative as it used to be. Just when I was considering retirement, Grace stepped up to take over.
Mom, I'm always ready to take over, so take a break whenever you want.
Receiving Grace's heartfelt offer, I've thought about retiring and moving overseas to be with Joseph. Despite everything, I've come to realize how much I've been supported by many people throughout my life. I'll dedicate the rest of my life to giving back. With that thought, retirement seems a bit further away. My dream continues on.